If we've not met, my name is Chris. I was not here last week, and I'm glad to be back. I missed you guys. We are in a series called Like and Subscribe. Make sure you're following me on my TikTok channel for all the newest dances. Pause for dramatic effect. Okay. We are talking about this idea of commitment because as we start off a new year, it's all we hear about is resolutions and goals, and a lot of those are really good things. But, there's this reality of making a decision of who we want to be, what we want to accomplish, and all of those things circle around commitment. But one of my favorite things about starting off a new year, hands down, is that we get a brand new series of The Bachelor. Okay? Yeah, thank you. Slow clap. You don't have to raise your hand. I know you guys watch it. The Bachelor is what's wrong with our country in a TV show. And I love it. I love the show, not the problems it creates. It's such a crazy show. And if you don't know, I'm sure you know what it is because it's been on for like 700 years. But, you get a guy and 30 women. And on night one, half of these women are like, I know for sure that we had a connection and we're going to get married. But there's like 15 of them that feel that way. And then, they basically just wait for this guy to dump the rest of them over an 8-week period so that hopefully they can end up getting proposed to at the end. But at the end of the last episode, they show up at a proposal location not even knowing they might get a proposal or they also might get dumped. Like, what a terrible way to go into your proposal. It's like, it's a 50-50 chance. But I'm all in either way. And then, assuming that he proposes and she says yes, the show ends. And they do like an after the rose ceremony now and some stuff like that. But what I really want is I want a season of the newly engaged couple watching him act like a mess for 8 weeks with 30 other women. That's the show I want to watch, because that's the reality. The show ends with this commitment, this love, and they're weeping and reading letters. And I always knew from day one when I tripped out of a limo, whatever the thing is, they're so committed in this moment. They make this commitment, but what about the whole back end of this thing, of starting a relationship, of having an actual normal interaction with your families, of deciding, are we going to live in the same city? Are we going to do long distance? Of actually figuring out what does it mean to have like fights and disagreements and build a relationship? None of that stuff. We see the commitment happen, but we don't see the relationship happen. And that's the reality with most movies and shows, stories that we watch. We see the wedding, but not the actual marriage. We see the moment someone kind of figures out who they want to be, and they declare, okay, I'm going to be this kind of person now, and we're excited for them, but we don't actually get to see them put the work in to become that kind of person. Unless it's a sports movie, when we always get a great montage scene, like Rocky with Eye of the Tiger playing in the background. It's like, but even that, it's like 30 seconds that's supposed to have like 6 months of time and work put in. It's this fast-forwarded experience of the work, the effort that it takes to actually do something that you've committed to. And we really struggle to stick with the commitments that we made. There's a definition of commitment that we're using for this series. It says, commitment is the ability to stick with something, returning to the same mundane task again and again, despite there being other interesting options available. This is actually the subtitle for The Bachelor. No, I'm just kidding. Come on, you guys. That was a good one. This reality, and it's not always necessarily mundane, but I do like the idea of the interesting tasks because we get distracted by other things. And it's not always necessarily other better things. It's other things that we might think are possibly better. We don't even always know if it's a better option or a better fit or a better company or a better job or a better relationship. It's just that it might be. It's different. It's interesting. I want to change it up, but this idea of commitment that we're talking about is such an important piece for us. Last week, Dave was here and he talked about the process of choosing what we want to commit to do. And today I want to talk about how we stay in that commitment. How do we get from where we are currently to where we want to be? But I think that For a lot of us, if you're anything like me, and again, this is very much my own experience that I kind of think as I teach through and as I like read through scriptures, like I can only process it through my own experience. I'm not really good at giving you guys like, well, here's perfectly how it should look. I can tell you my kind of broken, hobbled along path. A lot of us, it's not necessarily that we don't know how to get where we want to go. It's that we just want to wait until there's an easier way to get where we want to go. It's like, I know how to do these things. I know how to become the person I want to become. I know how to accomplish the goals. I just don't want to actually do it that way. And maybe if I wait, there'll be an easier way. Maybe if I wait, those things will just magically happen. Sometimes we choose a goal or we make a commitment and we stall out getting started because we want there to be an easier path. Sometimes the things that we actually commit to aren't reasonable or available. As and I often joke, my wife and I joke around, it's like, man, I would absolutely eat healthy every meal if I had a personal chef who made me healthy food that was also delicious for every meal. It's like, well, that's unreasonable. But that's like, that would be great. I would love to change my financial situation. I want to have a bigger savings account. I want to whatever it is, but I'm not going to change the way I spend my money. I just want it to be different. I want a better relationship with my kids. I'm not going to change my work calendar. I'm not going to reprioritize anything. I just want it to be changed. I'm committed to it changing somehow. I don't want to have to do the stuff, but I would be happy if it was better. This is the reality for myself in so many different areas. Maybe some of you have felt this in some areas. Like, I know what I want. I know the hard way to get it, but I'm looking for a better way, an easier way. And sometimes it's just the hard way of the work, of coming back to the mundane tasks. The majority of the Old Testament is really about this struggle. It's about God's children, about Israel deciding who they want to be and then struggling to actually follow through with that commitment, to actually be that person, to be that nation, to be God's children in the way that he's called them to be. It's over and over again. They get themselves into trouble, and then they see the light, and they're like, you know what, we're going to really get it this time. And then, they don't. And I love reading these types of stories because I see kind of a reflection of my own experience of deciding who I want to be, and I'm really committed, and I'm confident. I know that's who I want to be, but oftentimes I get distracted. I just stop moving forward. I find excuses or reasons to not be the person that I want to be, or maybe that God's called me to be. There's a period of time when Israel was living in the Promised Land, and the Promised Land is a term, if you guys have been in church, you've probably heard this term before. It's actually used even just outside of church. But the Promised Land was this land that was promised. Follow me now. It was full of milk and honey is how it was described, which maybe not be thrilling to you, but to them it was like, that's everything we want in life. Full of an abundance of goodness, of blessing, of the stuff that you want. You don't have to strive and scratch and work for it, but it's just there. It's everywhere. And they were pulled out of this promised land, and they were put in exile in Babylon. They were taken out of the place where everything was the way that they wanted it to be. It was beautiful. It had enough. And they were pulled out of that place into a place where they were not allowed to be who they wanted to be. They weren't allowed to worship the way they wanted to worship. They were captive and exiled in Babylon, and they hated it. They hated it. And there was a lot of people at the time that were telling them, they said, just wait. Before you know it, you're going to be back in the Promised Land. Just wait it out. Don't worry. Just wait it out. You'll be there. It's okay. Just take a breath. Don't do any. We're going to get back there. But there's a prophet that God was speaking through named Jeremiah. In Jeremiah 29, he says this. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all of those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Now, I can't really imagine a collection of verses that would be more frustrating to them. They're hearing all of these prophets, so-called prophets, saying, you know what, don't do anything, just sit tight, hang on, we're going to be back in the promised land before you know it. Milk and honey for everybody, on the house. We got it covered. And then God speaks through Jeremiah and says, all of these things that feel like we're going to be here for a while. Build houses. Plant gardens, get married and have kids and marry those kids, and then they will have kids. This is generations. And not even just that, but also seek the prosperity, pray for the country, the place that has brought you into captivity, the place you're in exile. Because if it prospers, you too will prosper. There's a reality here where I think that God is telling them to become who they are supposed to become, even though every outside circumstance is not the way they want it to be. It's hard, it's frustrating, it's difficult. They feel trapped. They were taken from there was all kinds of injustices. I'm not saying that they should have been there, but God's saying you need to just continue pursuing what I have called you to pursue, becoming who I have called you to become. They were thinking a little bit more along the lines of, like when the conditions are right, we'll get back to it. But right now, definitely not here. We're just going to bide our time until we get back to the good place. I feel like I have this same thing over and over again. When the conditions are right, I will do it. I don't talk about this a lot, but I started working out last fall. Yeah, okay, you don't need to applaud. It wasn't in that dire of a situation, everybody. I started working, it was actually in August, and the easiest time for my family's schedule, for my work schedule, the way it works out for me to go is at like 5:45 in the morning. And I'm not a morning person. But, in August, you wake up at 5:45 and the sun's out and people are on their way surfing. And it's like, okay, the rest of the world is up and I can figure this out. Well, then it got cold and dark. And now when I get up to go to the gym, there's a million reasons not to. It is practically snowing outside. You guys, I don't know if you've been outdoors over the last few weeks. It's winter. It's hard. And so my mind, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll just do this again in the summer. Like, well, the summer is when I want to have the beach bod. So I guess I have to do it. It's like, I want it to be like, I want the perfect conditions so that I can do this commitment. It's like it's already hard work, but everything else should at least be easy for me so I can do the hard work. But we want that in every aspect of our lives. Like, man, I know that changing, growing, making a difference, pursuing goals, growing spiritually, I know that these things take work. And so I just want everything else to be perfect so that I can focus in on this one hard thing. But that's none of our realities. I don't know that any of us necessarily would say we're in exile or captivity, but things are hard. We wish that things were different. And on top of that, we know that we need to grow. We know that God's calling us to change, to transform, to be changed by His Spirit. You can find every excuse possible to delay starting, though. I'm not going to start on a Wednesday. I'll start on a Monday. Like, well, I'm not going to start in the middle of a month. I'll wait till the beginning of the month. Like, okay, and that's the middle of the year. I'll start a new year. It's a great time to start. And then this year is like, oh, New Year's on a Saturday? I'll start on Monday, the 3rd. That seems like the perfect time to start. I've got a million reasons. If you guys need an excuse, let me know. I can figure out an excuse for you to delay the thing that you know you want to do, that you need to do. It's so easy for us to keep pushing this off. We kind of fall into this trap. I don't know that any of us actually believe this, but we live like we think that if God wanted me to do something, He would probably make it easy for me to do that thing. It would be really easy and effortless just to see that happen. But as we say that out loud, none of us actually think that that's true. We believe that we're called to something. Jesus himself, and he's speaking to his followers in Luke 9, he says, I want you to take up your cross and follow me. Die to yourself, set your own preferences and desires aside, and continue to lay all of the easy path that you probably want and the simple things and the very clear answers. It's like a lot of that stuff's going to get put down to the side, and each day I want you to carry your cross and follow me. And I think as we read this passage in Jeremiah, there's this idea for us to hold on to, that the life that we are longing for, it might not be about finding different soil as much as it is about growing deeper roots. It's not like, well, I need to go to a different place and then it'll happen. But I think it might be more about just cultivating the place that we're at. I'm going to say this once because I said it way too many times last service and it took a lot of time. There's a lot of nuance here. I'm not saying if you're in an abusive or an unhealthy scenario, just stick it out. I'm not saying if somebody is taking advantage of you or manipulating you. There's nuance here. I'm talking about it's cold outside and I don't want to get out of bed. I'm talking about I want to eat out every day. I don't want to save my money. I'm talking about the things that we just want the path to be easier and flat and smoothed and paved. That's what I'm talking about today. There's a reality for us that we need to figure out how to foster and dig and grow into deeper roots. And so I want to look at just a few ideas in this passage that I think might help us as we navigate this. And in the end, if you guys can stick with me for another 12 minutes and 10 seconds, I'll share with you one of my most frustrating Bible verses ever. And you probably all have it memorized, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So how do we start becoming who we are supposed to be? Who we want to be, who we're called to be? How do we start becoming that person, following through on those commitments exactly where we are at? So the first thing that God said through Jeremiah is he said, build homes and plan to stay. Build homes, which seems like it would be a lot of work. Build homes, set in roots, plan on being here for a while. And I think there's a reality for us that we need to decide and declare that we aren't going anywhere. We need to make a decision and say, you know what, this is where I'm at, and I'm going to fully be present in this space. I'm not going to put my life on pause, on hold, while I wait for something different to happen or a different situation to show up. There's a permanence. Decide that where you're at is where you want to be, where you choose to be. Last summer, it was actually, I think maybe 2 summers ago, it was the summer of 2020. About halfway through the year, we were kind of figuring out all the COVID stuff and lockdowns, and we were still meeting outdoors, and everything was crazy. I'm so glad things aren't crazy anymore, by the way. But I found myself at this really, really low place. And I just I'm always honest with you guys, but sometimes when I say things, I feel like maybe this is too honest. But I think it's important for you guys to hear this stuff from people on stages with microphones. I got to a place where I was super upset and getting very resentful with God because I love being a pastor and I love this church and this city, and I really didn't like what church was like anymore. It wasn't fun. It didn't have the things that I really loved, and there was so much like fear and hesitation, and there was just so many different challenges and anger and people. I mean, it was really, really hard, and I was very upset about it. It's like, I really want to do this, but not this way, not in this exile, so to speak. And I started talking with some friends and a counselor, and they really started to work with me on this idea of recognizing that I wasn't obligated to do this, that God is inviting me to choose to do this, that I get to choose how I show up. And I started to slowly try and shift my mindset and my heart, and God did a lot of work in my heart, and I started to find joy in figuring out different ways, different ideas, trying new things, and it was really hard, and honestly, I would have just rather it been the way that it used to be. But I experienced something incredibly beautiful over the last couple of years. I've met a lot of you guys over the last couple of years since that experience. People have said yes to Jesus and gotten baptized over the last couple of years. There's been so much goodness that has happened and fun and memories that we have made, and we've seen God continue to work. And it's not because everything is perfect again. It's still crazy and hard, but it's like, you know what? I'm committed to this place. I believe that God can continue to do stuff in me and in our church, even though everything is kind of hard and difficult. And maybe you feel that way in your family or your marriage or your work. And I just want to encourage you, because just because I'm a pastor doesn't mean it's always easy and I've always got tons of faith. It's okay to be frustrated, and there's an invitation for us to choose. Say, I recognize that I'm in exile of sorts, and I'm going to choose to build a home in this place. I'm going to choose to be here. I'm going to figure out a new way. I'm going to cultivate some new things in this space. The second thing he says is plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Take responsibility to develop what you need right where you are. There's this invitation for us to actually do the work and not wait for the work to be done for us. Not wait for somebody else to plant a garden. Not just sprinkle some seeds and assume that it's actually going to grow something that we can live off of, but actually to lean in and to continue to do the work. I don't know how many of you guys like gardening or plants in general. I bought a tree kind of accidentally 2 weeks ago. It's a long story. It was like a $10 discount, and so I bought a $35 tree, and I don't even like trees. I like trees. I don't like growing things. Anyways, they said, do you have shade? Because this tree can't be in the sun. And I said, all that I have is shade. And I don't mean that metaphorically. Our patio is totally shaded. And so I took it home and I put it in our shaded patio and I watered it, and I still killed this tree. It's unbelievable. But anyways, this garden, this planting gardens, eat the food that they produce. There is this ongoing work of seasons, of continuing to cultivate and care for and recognize what's needed in different seasons. Planting a garden implies that you're not just daydreaming about food elsewhere, but you're actually paying attention to what's happening. And I think that that's an important piece for us, because a lot of times the things that we obsess about or we daydream about are the things that we actually really become passionate about. We spend that much time thinking about something and caring about it. And I grew up in the South, and we had a huge garden, and we relied on it heavily, and there was rabbits. And I won't tell you what we had to do to those rabbits to get them out of the garden. But it was like we were passionate about defending and protecting and cultivating and caring for this garden. There was an intentionality that came with that. And I think that you and I are called to focus on and work and delight in this garden that we are called to plant. All right, the third one, I got to keep moving. The third one, in verse 6, he says, marry and have children. And he goes on, he says, marry your children and make sure that they have children. There is this relational piece that he's talking about, cultivating relational intimacy inside your current community. Now, this is a difficult one too, because sometimes we don't like the job that we're at. Sometimes we don't like the location that we live. Sometimes we have a really difficult time with the people that are around us. Not here, other places. We are perfect. But sometimes you have a really difficult time with the people in your cubicles or the people at the schools, or maybe you get some new people in your friendship circle and it changes the dynamic. Maybe there's tensions in families or friendships or neighborhoods. There's all these different relational tensions that start to happen. And a lot of times what happens is we say, you know what? I'm not going to buy into this, and I'm not going to let these people affect me. And I think there's a reality that Israel was probably considering the same thing, of saying, you know what, we're for sure not going to continue developing families in this setting. I'll wait till we get back to the good place, or just around our people, the people that think and agree and vote and believe the way that I believe and feel the way that I feel about everything. Let me just wait until we're surrounded by the people that are just like us. Let me find people that are the same stage of life as me, that are interested in the same things as me. And I think there's a challenge here for each of us, because we do like to be around people that are like us. Like, we would never really say it, but it's like, I think I'm right. Well, some of us would say it. I think I'm right. I think I have the right perspective. I think I like the best music, and I want to be around people that, agree with me. That's our natural, we're going to naturally go that way. But there's this challenge to cultivate healthy relationships, and that can be a really difficult thing, especially in places and in communities where there's diverse perspectives and experiences. That is one of the gifts of committing to a local church. And if you come to Discover, I'm giving you a little sneak peek. One of the greatest gifts of being part of a church is that this is one of the only places that you will choose to show up and be around people that are different than you. It's a good thing. It is not easy. It's a good thing, though. It's a crucial thing for us. The best friends, the accountability partners, the career coaches, the spiritual mentors, they could be in a room of people that you're sitting in right now. It could be in a difficult place. I know, my wife and I, we used to joke around about how we actually we were exiled for a little while. Our exile wasn't Babylon, it was Des Moines, Iowa. And I think I've told some of this story before, but we lived in Des Moines. We felt like God really was calling us to move there and help start this church in the downtown Des Moines. And we knew for sure we were supposed to go there, but we also knew we weren't going to stay there forever. Like, it wasn't going to be our forever home. I wasn't going to be buried in Iowa, however you guys talk. I'm from the South. Okay, so it was really difficult, though, because when you move somewhere and you don't know anybody, it's hard to figure out, well, how do I make friends? Because I don't want to stay here. I don't know. You don't have to raise your hand if you've ever felt that. But there's this challenge that comes with that of saying, like, well, I might be here a year or 2 years, hopefully not more, whatever the thing is. But when we got there, and it wasn't because we were super spiritual and had it all figured out, but we just said, I think for our own sanity, we need to just plan on setting in roots. I don't think we'll be here forever, but let's just plan and live like we will be. And we made some of the best friends of our lives in that place. We had our first son there. We learned more in those years than probably any other time in our marriage. And when I look back, I have to remind myself that we weren't actually even there for 3 full years. It was a little less than 3 years. Now, almost all of it was winter, but it's a crazy experience, and there's this temptation to say, it's like, well, this isn't really where I want to end up, and so let me just bide my time, and once I get back to the place, then I'll focus in on these relationships again, then I'll start. But no, there's this calling to cultivate that exactly where we are. And actually in February, we're doing a series on relationships and friendships. We're going full Toy Story, you guys. We're doing a series called Applause for Toy Story. Applause break. Chris went to the gym, and we're talking about Toy Story in February. Noted. Okay. We're not talking about dating. We're not talking about marriage. We're talking about friendship, because every best marriage and every best dating relationship also has friendship involved in it anyways. And the reality is that there's a lot of loneliness. There's an epidemic of loneliness is what sociologists are calling this. And so how do we actually cultivate and build and sustain strong, healthy friendships? We're going to spend some time on this in the month of February. So the last one that I want to look at is from verse 7. And again, this is probably one of the biggest challenges. God says, work for the peace and the prosperity of the city of your exile. There's an invitation to work, to make where you are a place where everyone belongs and benefits. And I'm running short on time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But I have had jobs in the past when I was going through school, different places, even some of the churches that I've worked at, where internally I really resented and disliked so much about where I was at. And I just kind of was biding my time. And as I look back, that is one of the things that I think pains me the most about some of my learning seasons, is that I spent so much energy just resenting and being bitter and frustrated about the people that were in charge, or the people that I had to work with or be around or whatever it was. And it wasn't just churches. It was actually oftentimes other jobs that I had before I was in ministry full time. I wish that I had been more intentional about that time. It was so easy to be frustrated and angry about that place that you find yourself in. And there's a call and an invitation to work for the goodness, the success, and pray for the place you find yourself. Jesus echoes this when he's calling us to pray for our enemies. There's this ongoing invitation for us to actually cleanse our heart from that kind of frustration and bitterness and angst and actually set that stuff aside and choose something better, even if it's not the place you want to be, to still work for that goodness. None of this is what these people wanted to hear. None of this is what Israel wanted. They wanted God to destroy their captors so they could go back to the land of blessing and be the people they wanted to be. And God was calling them to do something exactly where they were at, as difficult and frustrating and uncomfortable as it may have been. And after these few verses where God speaks to them in this way, there is a verse that you may have memorized, and I have heard so many people quote, and you may have it painted on a wall in your house, and it is Jeremiah 29:11, and it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." It is a beautiful promise. It is a beautiful verse. And most people know that verse and none of the other ones. Most people quote that verse and they say, so since God has a plan to prosper me and for hope and a future, I'm just going to wait until that plan shows up. I'm just going to hang out until he gets me into that place. But, I mean, that's verse 11. It comes after these other verses where he says, build homes, cultivate gardens, have families, pray for your enemies, work for peace and the good of the city you find yourself in. As you do these things in this frustrating, difficult, hard, uncomfortable, problematic space you find yourself in, you should know that I have a plan. And I will be with you, and there is hope in the midst of all of those challenges, in the midst of the exile and Babylon and the captivity and all the junk you find yourself in. There is a plan and there is a purpose, and God is working in that space as we work in that space. It's not waiting for him to clear the path so we can waltz into becoming the people we want to be. It's saying, I'm going to do the work. God's called me to do the work, and he's promised that as I do the work, he's going to do the work too. He's going to be working. He's going to be rolling out his purpose, his plan, his goodness. I know it's maybe not what we want to hear. We'd like to daydream about a different life and avoid dealing with the frustrations of our actual life. But we fall into this temptation of the grass is greener idea. And I saw this a long time ago, and I wrote it down. I don't even remember where I saw it. But your biggest problems are usually you problems, and you are everywhere you go. And it's a little bit silly, but it's also a little bit true. And I can point at my job or my spouse or my neighbors or my government or my whatever it is. But the reality is that we are called to rely on God to transform our hearts and our minds, to grow us, to continue renewing us and making us into a new creation. And it does not matter where we are, God is still doing those things. But we like to kick the ball down the field and assume, you know what, when everything is easier, then I'll start to see that change. Then I'll start to experience that wholeness. Then I'll pursue these things that I've committed to. So here's what I want us to do. I don't want us to wait it out. I don't want us to wait for this to magically happen and we'll just kind of bide our time. I want us to put in the work. And so I want to ask a question, and I want you to think about this. The question that I want you to think about is, where is your exile? That's a word maybe you don't use on a normal basis. Identify your exile. What is the place that you feel like, you know what, I've been brought to this place. Maybe I brought myself, maybe somebody else dragged me here kicking and screaming. But where is the place that you feel like I am stuck here and this is not where I want to be? Maybe it's relational. Maybe it's in your career, your finances. Maybe it's emotional or physical. It could be a number of different areas, maybe spiritual. But what is the area that you find yourself just so frustrated that that's where you're at? You just can't wait for something, some point to change, for God to kind of wave his hand and everything to be different. If I could just change any one of these scenarios, it would be this situation. I want us to identify that, because our tendency is to ignore that, to kind of leave that off to the side and just wait for that to resolve itself one day. And I think that God is calling us to make the commitment, to follow through, to do the work, to build the house, to plant the garden, to pray for those spaces that we are so frustrated by, that we wish were different. But this is what it means for us to commit to something, is to continue showing up. It's not just to say, I'm going to do this, but it's actually to show up day after day, regardless of where we find ourselves and what's happening around us, to continue becoming who God's calling us to become. We cannot save ourselves. We cannot fix ourselves. God does that. Jesus helps transform our hearts and our minds, and he invites us to pick up our cross and to follow him along the way. So there's 3 just kind of practical things I want to invite you guys to. The first one is that as you find yourself in an area of exile, one of the most important things that you can do is stay grounded in the truth of who God is. And we started at the beginning of January, we started our Read Every Day plan. You can jump in now. It's just January 9th. And the great thing about this plan is you can start whenever you want. And today's a great day to start. So you can go to the BibleIn1Year.org, or you can just search Bible in 1 Year in the App Store on your phone. It is an awesome app. I've actually only read it once, but I've played the audio every day. You guys, it'll read it to you. It's like story time. You can cuddle up with a blanket. It's fantastic. There's an incredible reading plan. There's a commentary and devotional thought. It is really, really good. There's a full version. There's an express version as well, and one for students, all in the same app, Bible in 1 Year app. I would love for you guys to commit to doing that and staying connected to God's word. The second thing, as you find yourself in areas where you want to see change and growth happen, where you want to see transformation happen, is prayer is a super important thing. And for the first time here at our campus, we're actually going to be doing a 21 days of prayer, intentional prayer. It starts tomorrow on the 10th, and we will end it together on the 30th. And I have counted over and over again, that seems like 20 days, but I can't figure out how it's 21. So just bear with me here. But we have a prayer guide and really helpful resources and tools. And for those of us that want to commit to this, I would encourage you to do this. It's not 24 hours a day of prayer. It's not showing up at church to pray with everybody else. It's something that you can do. You can do 5 or 10 minutes of prayer. You can turn this into an hour. The guide it kind of works in a way that'll be really helpful for you to do that. And I would love for you guys to join me on that as we start off this year. And then the third thing is, Matt shared about this a little bit earlier, but the Teach Us to Pray art experience. So I won't talk a lot about it, but it's going to be basically an art show. And there are images and words that help kind of poke and prod at us to help us expand our idea of what prayer is, and maybe even start to relieve some of the frustrations or the discouragements that some of us may have around the idea of prayer. I would love for you guys to come and be a part of it. It probably would take about 20 minutes for you to go through the experience. It's an individual type of thing, or you could come with a family or a friend if you want, but it's coming up on the 19th. These are ways for us to ground ourselves, to be intentional about grounding ourselves in God's presence as we make new commitments, as we fight to stick to commitments, and maybe as we find ourselves in difficult places that we may currently call exile. Maybe a few years from now, we'll look back and be like, that was my exile. There's an invitation for us to see the goodness of God, the hope that he has for us, even in the midst of the circumstances you find yourself in today. Let's pray together.